A meeting is an event at which the minutes are kept and the hours are lost. The Q3 results call, this time on Wrestling with the Business.
Welcome back to Wrestling with the Business. My name is Matt Lambert, and with me is the man who has the stamina to go through that massive financial report, Jeremy Baudet. And that's what we're talking about. The Q3 earnings report came in a short time ago, and we're going to get into the main topics of that. So just tell me, Jer, how extensive was this report that you sat through?
Yeah, it wasn't Q2, but it was definitely Q3. I will tell you that I sat down personally and listened to George Barrios and Michelle Wilson.
Who are they, by the way?
George Barrios and Michelle Wilson are the co-presidents of World Wrestling Entertainment. Vince McMahon was not on the call. Actually, they were really the only two that really spoke much at all during the call. But they did there was an extensive question and answer period, which in my opinion was far more fascinating than the actual prepared statements that they shared. Usually, like most earnings calls, they spent most of their time trying to avoid answering questions. But I think if you listen carefully and if you paid really close attention to the details throughout the entirety of the call, you can sort of piece some things together. So I think we might have some interesting information to share as a result of this, some potential information. No guarantees. Most of this is interpretation, but I think that there was some interesting information that was shared.
All right, let's get right into it then. I am most interested to hear what, if any, what the update is on the Saudi Arabia deal.
So, because of the way that the WWE splits up the regions, what we've been referring to as the Saudi deal is more commonly within the organization known as the MENA deal. MENA, M-E-N-A, stands for Middle Eastern North Africa, which is the region. So really what they're vying for are the television rights, performance rights, licensing rights to share their product solely through distribution in the Middle Eastern and North African region. So they consistently refer to it as the MENA deal across the call. And this is what I found. There was a lot of talk about the MENA deal, but most of it was surrounding the agreement that went through about 3 or 4 days after this call took place. I think it was November 4th or 5th that the 2-show-a-year deal was signed. To be honest with you, I expected them to talk a lot about the television rights in Saudi Arabia. They spent a lot of time talking about India. As a matter of fact, George Barrios was actually unwilling, and there were several investors that pushed him on the topic of Saudi distribution, and he consistently refused to do two things. The first thing he refused to do was give them a target date for the closure of it, which is not a good sign. And the second thing that he refused to do is he refused to talk about a plan B. So there was one particular investor that said, so what happens if we get to, let's say February of next year and we don't have a Saudi deal? What then? And he was basically like, this is considered must win. We're not gonna, I'm not gonna talk about that, is basically what he said. So
they have all their eggs in one basket and it's not going anywhere.
It seems to be slow. What struck me as so interesting about the topic is that he said that by the end of the year they were hoping to have an India deal. So if rumors are any indication, it seems that they've shifted things a little bit. In addition, usually you try and talk about your projections for the following year, like now, like usually by mid Q4, you want to be talking about the following year. Well, they've pushed. They're talking about how they don't want to talk about 2020 until the Q4 earnings call. So they don't want to talk about 2020. the end of February, which is raising, my spidey senses tingling when stuff like that happens. It really raises a red flag. It's like you want to wait until you have the final earnings for 2019, and you're already most of the way through Q1 2020 before you even start talking about 2020, talking about what your projections are for 2020. So it seems to me that in a passive way, it seems like they're hedging their bets, and they're not counting on a MENA deal by the end of this year. They're hoping that India comes through and, in all fairness, saves Q4, because so far Q3 earnings were very bad. They adjusted their projections for earnings by the end of this year down. However, they quickly recovered by saying, even at 180 to 190 million, it's still the greatest number on record. Well, yeah, that might be true, but if you're up at 200, it looks really bad when you have to drop it down like that. So they adjusted it down about 5 or 10%. And if they don't get a Saudi deal, if they don't get an India deal by the end of this year, it's going to be even lower than that. And who knows where it can end up being.
So a couple of videos ago, we mentioned that the Saudi contract was somewhat updated, and they added a second show per year, which they were already doing. WWE was already doing 2 shows a year. But now it's actually in writing. So is this going to have any effect on the next quarter? Or from what you're saying now, it sounds like nothing's going to change.
If you look at the stock price, they're kind of making me a little bit of a liar, because I was saying that the stock price would drop after Q3 earnings came out because it wasn't going to be very good, and then it would just continue to slowly, steadily. Well, it's actually recovered a little bit. On Friday, I think it closed around $56, $57. And if you look at the stock trend, it plummeted down to $55, and then it's pretty much been around there, $56, $57. So I think that 2 show a year, again, we talked about in our last video, right? WWE needs to eliminate uncertainty. And the best way to eliminate uncertainty is to sign long-term contracts, put deals in place with guaranteed money on the table, sign long-term contracts with your talent, long-term contracts for TV, long-term contracts for distribution, licensing, all that kind of stuff. That all levels the playing field out and makes you look like a good long-term investment. So it seems like they've responded very effectively. They got that quick Saudi deal signed, and investors maybe calmed down a little bit instead of going into a pure panic, and things leveled right off around $55.
All right, so aside from the MENA deal, what other sections were they looking at as far as to make increases in? I know they focus a lot on live events, on merchandise, and whatever else. What has the live event situation been like?
So regarding live events, so they added the second Saudi show each year. They held Crown Jewel this year, and there was some questions and comments on the call about, okay, so you didn't really plan on Crown Jewel, yet you had Crown Jewel. It was this huge event. You brought in all these stars. What do we think? What kind of an impact do we think that's going to have on Q4 earnings? And George really didn't share a whole heck of a lot on that topic. He didn't really give much away. So then they asked, okay, well, you brought in a lot of talent. You brought Tyson Fury in, right? Mm-hmm. Just as one example, you brought Tyson Fury in, and he had the match with Braun Strowman. That was designed to draw a significant number of eyes. You had Cain Velasquez come in and do an appearance. And what he basically said is, early in the call, I mentioned that we had that Q4 expenses might be higher than Q3 expenses because we pulled some of our 2020 projection investments in talent into 2019. So what he's effectively saying is, we didn't want to bring Fury in until 2020. We didn't want to bring Velasquez in until 2020, but we felt like we had to pull them into 2019 because things were looking pretty dark. And so we decided to pull that investment in.
So they were scrambling for a quick fix.
which is interesting because there were some rumored reports that Vince McMahon wasn't terribly satisfied with the shape that Cain Velasquez was in in some of the run-up shows and then at Crown Jewel, and he did look a little unfit, should I say.
Yep.
And his match was all of 88 seconds. So the pieces seem to be locking together. It does seem like they are not in a panic, but it does seem like they're scrambling, should I say, to try to put butts in seats and sell the WWE as an organization that is going to work overseas.
Interesting. Really makes you wonder what we're going to see in the coming weeks as far as TV and whatnot, if they obviously are just scrambling for a quick plan. But, what's been a major topic of discussion is the Wednesday Night Wars. Was there any talk of AEW or competition on this call?
Yeah, there were two specific things that are very interesting that were said in relation to AEW. So AEW was brought up, and George was a really good sport about it. He talked about how it's a competitive market, and then he kind of pulled it out of wrestling and he started talking about how the NBA is seeing competition, MLB is seeing competition. Even now, the NFL is starting to see some competition, which was an interesting little shout out to the XFL there on the call.
Mm-hmm.
One of the investors expressed concern that, which is terribly interesting given the news that's broken in the last couple of weeks. They asked about AEW's effect on wages of talent.
Oh, really?
And he basically said, are you concerned that AEW is going to be either pulling your good talent away from you or driving their wages up, which is going to increase your overhead expenses? They mentioned Jericho by name as somebody that's really sort of grabbed the bull by the horns and is really doing good things for AEW. And George basically said, listen, it's a competitive market, and that the salary increases that our people are seeing is, he didn't really explicitly say this, but he sort of inferred that it didn't really have anything to do with AEW. He said, and I quote, when the company does better, our talent does better, and that's the way that it should be.
Wow.
Which is very interesting. I mean, again, this is about 2-week-old information, right? So I wonder what he would say now, knowing that Randy Orton basically posted a picture of himself with an elevator with some people he doesn't know, and now all of a sudden he's getting this sweet 5-year deal, right?
And at least 3 other wrestlers have asked for their release since then.
Yeah. So in the last call, I mentioned briefly about how I thought some mid-level and low-level card guys. I mentioned Rey Mysterio by name, thinking that some of those guys might end up getting released because the top-end talent is going to be sucking up. It's like tall trees and medium trees, right? Your medium trees aren't going to be able to thrive when the big trees are stealing all the sunlight and rain. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what seems to be happening. Sin Cara asked for his release. And I read a report today that indicated that Rey Mysterio could be gone before WrestleMania, because he signed a 2-year extension in September of 2018, but it gave him an out at 18 months. So hypothetically speaking, if he chooses to leave, he could leave as early as March. So it'll be interesting to see. That might be something that we can forecast. February, March rolls around and they don't really seem to be doing anything with him. There's a good chance he may have asked for his release.
Well, he's facing Lesnar for the title this weekend, or this coming weekend at Survivor Series, so we'll see what happens there.
It's very clear to me that they're trying to act like AEW isn't bothering them, and AEW is totally bothering them.
Oh, yeah. Everything they do is a knee-jerk reaction to them.
Yeah.
So what's the... did they mention any long-term strategy? It doesn't sound like they really have a major plan on mind, but what is their plan for the next couple years?
So one thing that I forgot to mention relative to AEW, and for me, this blew me away. and this goes into your question now about long-term strategy, because WWE is a company that's playing the long game. And he was asked specifically about, hey, Wednesday night wars, you guys don't really seem to be doing that great, was sort of the inference of the question. And, what are you going to do about it? Was kind of the general takeaway from it.
Mm-hmm.
And George Barrios said, we are going to focus on developing our product and making our shows on Monday and Friday nights the best they can be.
Wow.
Which struck me as a very interesting comment, because for me it was a bit of a paradigm shift, because this whole time I'm thinking that they put NXT out there to be a direct competitor, to challenge AEW, to come to the table, and that's not what they did at all. I mean, if this call was any indication to me, they're using NXT as a human shield. They're using NXT. They didn't put NXT on the USA Network on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock so that NXT can get more air and can grow. They put it up there because they thought it would shade AEW.
Right.
And they thought that it would pull some of the viewership from AEW, prevent AEW from getting the air. It's almost like they're feeding NXT to AEW. It's like they don't expect NXT to be better than AEW. They don't expect NXT to be a flagship piece of their long-term strategy at all. They're just trying to use NXT to smother AEW, is basically. Which, again, I made a reference to this in our last conversation about this, and I think we talked about, man, if they could just move to a Tuesday night, move to a Thursday night, move to a Saturday night, they might be able to double their viewership.
Right.
And that is exactly what WWE was thinking when they had. And that also explains why in the original video that we posted on this YouTube channel, my quick take, it explains why they gave away the farm on NXT, because they really didn't care. They didn't put NXT on air to be some long-term strategy. They put it on air to kill AEW. And if that's what you're going to do, you'll do it at a loss. You'll do it for free. You'll do it at no margin at all whatsoever, right?
Right.
And so that's why they gave it away for $50 million, because they weren't trying to make money off of it. This is about destroying AEW. It's not about making NXT grow, which is sad because it's the best product they've got.
Yeah, and that was very clear to anyone who follows behind the scenes. I mean, NXT had storylines going on that were pre-recorded, matches that were pre-recorded that never got shown because they went live on USA. So it was very clear that it was just a very quick, okay, AEW's doing this, so we're going to do this.
The only other comment that I would make about long-term strategy that, again, was never directly said, but there was just, if you look at the metrics, if you look at the trend lines on the graph, I spent a whole bunch of time going through these trend schedules, which is just this huge list of aggregate data across their three major revenue streams. That's media, live events, and consumer products, right? So your media is your WWE network, your television rights, your TV deals, that kind of stuff. Live events are your live events, whether it be huge ones like WrestleMania or dark shows in the middle of nowhere. And consumer products, that's your licensing stuff, right? Your action figures, your t-shirts, your video games, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you can see it all trending, in my opinion, to an international audience. China and India are the future. There's no doubt about it. They see what the NBA has been doing. As a matter of fact, George Barrios specifically mentioned the NBA when he talked about, the success that the NBA has had in China is 25 years in the making. He was basically explicitly telling me that they have the same business model that the NBA has, and that they're going to be moving overseas. It would appear to me that the WWE has no intention of dancing with the one that brought them. And I would say that if you are looking into the future, it's going to be very interesting to see how this impacts what happens in the shows and on television each night, because you can bet that as you move into a market with a different cultural background, with different laws and different requirements. We saw it in Saudi Arabia, right? Mm-hmm. First ever women's match in Saudi Arabia, right? And they were dressed in frickin' burlap sacks. right? I think you're going to see more stuff like that where certain things can't be talked about when they're doing a show from Shanghai. Certain things shouldn't be mentioned. Certain stars go over when they're in certain shows. And the bigger that the market gets overseas, I mean, we're at a turning point right now. People aren't paying attention to it, but the distribution of live events, the number of live events is shrinking dramatically. They did 19 less live events overall in Q3 than they did in Q2. Now Q3 is almost always short on live shows. I don't want people to think that this is particularly new. Q3 is always a low, but year over year they did 19 less shows than they did in Q3 of last year. Okay. And when you look at the distribution of attendance, you find that they only do, let's say, between 5 and 15 shows outside of the US, but the attendance is so disproportionately higher that you've got almost the same average
they're
attendance
there so less frequently
overseas. Right. So Monday Night Raw goes to, LA, right? And they maybe half fill or 3/4 fill the Staples Center, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's whatever, 20, 25,000 people. They go to Saudi Arabia and they fill a 50 or 60,000 seat stadium. Well, you only have to do one of those for every Staples Center, for every 3 or 4 Staples Centers that you do, right? And that's a one-off. The Staples Center is a really big venue. Monday Night Raw at the Little Caesars Arena holds, 7 or maybe up to 10,000 people. So things are shifting. Things are shifting into a more global, there's a global feel to it. And they're investing more internationally in the content. It started with England, right? There's a UK championship.
NXT
right?
UK, yeah.
That's right. There's an NXT UK brand. Tyson Fury, he's not American, right? They're investing more in the internet. Cain Velasquez, he's not American either. Like they're investing more in an international brand, and it's going to spread, and it's going to spread, and it's going to spread. And one other interesting comment that they made that I'll close with, which struck me as very interesting. They were asked if they thought, one of the investors asked, I want to look this one up because I want to get it right. It's kind of funny. They were asked if so both George and Michelle were asked if they thought that the fact that there was going to be fewer dark matches would have a positive impact on the ticket sales for the live shows,
for the TV
and
shows.
Right. So the idea is, if you're doing less shows, scarcity, right? Standard supply and demand, scarcity is going to drive the value. Hey, if we're not coming to, Biloxi, Mississippi to film Raw, to do a dark show 2 or 3 times a year, the once a year we come there to film Raw, ticket sales are going to spike.
Right.
And what George basically said was, oh, you know what? We don't think so. We think that these are 2 totally different topics. They're entirely separate. They cater to different markets. So effectively, the laws of supply and demand don't affect WWE. Apparently, they're insulated from supply and demand, which to me says he's trying to keep expectations as low as he possibly can, which means that ticket sales, the number of shows are going down because ticket sales are going down. Ticket sales are going down because the product is junk. And in addition, just to squeeze one other little fun fact in, they were explicitly asked about the reorganization on the creative side of the business. They mentioned
Bischoff.
Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff, and they mentioned, hey, you brought Eric on for a couple of weeks, and now he's gone. What's with that? And he was basically like, yep, we've restructured the talent and the creative on the back end. We're very proud of the model that we have, and we're happy with it, and I'm not going to talk about anyone specifically.
So just ducking and dodging.
It feels like a scramble. It feels like a scramble. And the last, and I swear to God, this is the last one before we close out, but I want to show this thing. Because I think this is utterly and completely ridiculous. Okay. I have a list of their KPIs, their key performance indicators. These are the metrics that they use to measure the success of the business. business. And I'm going to do this old school. I'm actually going to hold this up. Okay. And all I want you to do is read the title there.
Raise it up a bit. Okay.
Social media followers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're tracking social media followers year over year, Q over Q, quarter over quarter. They're tracking that. They're tracking that as a metric. Why? Why are they tracking that? Here's another one. Global views on this side.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, global views on this side. Global hours viewed on that side. Why is that? Why is that? I don't know. You can't monetize. You can monetize views to a certain extent, right? But you can't support a multi-billion-dollar company on Facebook videos and YouTube advertisements and Google advertisements. This is not a significant source of revenue. Social media followers. The fact that Wrestling with the Business follows them on Twitter, to them, indicates a level of success. Doesn't make any sense at all. It's a useless metric. For a company of that size, it's a useless metric. It doesn't make any sense to me.
And they're constantly hyping that up.
And again, it's global views. Why would you be tracking global views? Because they're trying to extend beyond the United States, Canada, and Mexico. They're trying to extend beyond North America. The product is going to fundamentally change in the next probably 2 to 3 years. I think the product that you see in 2 to 3 years is going to be dramatically different. You're going to see them moving into more of a globalized product, and it's going to drive AEW to thrive, in my opinion, because AEW is going to do what AEW does. So far, these guys aren't really letting it bother them. So, all in all, I would say that the Q3 call was not nearly as boring as I thought it was going to be. I'm actually looking forward to the Q4 call at the end of January, and it'll be interesting to see where things lie, but things are very shaky right now. Things are very shaky, and they're definitely untenable. It gets to, if a situation like this sort of lingers where we're kind of balancing on the edge, investors are going to start to flee. And I tell you what, I didn't talk to any of the other investors on the call, but if I was one of the people that represented a hedge fund or one of the retirement groups that had invested in WWE, I would absolutely not be getting a very warm and fuzzy feeling. Anytime you've invested hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into an organization and you ask, there were probably 20 or 25 questions, and probably half of them were either I can't answer that or I'm not going to talk about that. And these were not questions like, what color underwear are you wearing, George? I mean, these were, hey, can you give me a little bit more detail about this chart that you shared? Can I get a little more granularity? Can you show me a little bit more about where this number came from? Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't break it up for you. So, very interesting. In some ways, it was a very typical earnings call, and in some ways, it was very atypical.
Wow. Well, it really makes you wonder what it is we're going to be watching in the next couple of years. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I assume there's links to these that we can attach to the video for people to check out in more detail.
Yeah, if anybody can't sleep, I'll attach the trending schedules link below, and I will attach the presentation. It's only about 10 slides, but I'll tell you what, 5 or 10 minutes on this, and you're going to be seeing everything is pointing down. So, yeah, that'll be available, link below.
All right, great. So leave your comments below. What do you think about the financial situation that WWE is in? Where do you think this is going to go? And do you really care?
How is it going to impact the product that you see on the screen? That's what is going to be so interesting. So based off of what we shared with you today, what do you think is going to be the next big move that the WWE is going to make? Are they going to push a new Middle Eastern star to try to attract some attention? They really haven't done that much yet, although Ali is getting a little bit more sunlight. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So this coming week, we've got videos coming up. Stay tuned. NXT TakeOver War Games is next weekend, as well as Survivor Series. We're going to have predictions on both of those shows. So keep in touch. And in the meantime, remember, always keep kayfabe, follow the money, and we'll keep wrestling with the business.